Hello and welcome to episode 37 of Anne and Steve Talk Stuff, where an artist and an economist walk into a podcast and things happen. Hey Stephen, how are you getting on?
I'm great, Anne. I'm really, really, really good. There was a really significant breakthrough in solid state battery technology last
Okay.
week. Um, did if you woke up in the middle of the night and you were like, "Oh, I feel a disturbance in the force," what
Hmm.
happened was this battery. So the way the batteries that normally go into cars are lithium-ion batteries,
Mm-hmm.
and basically they're literally the same as the yokes you stick into your remote control. They're
Yeah,
just
little things. Yeah.
chained together. That's what they are. And
Mm.
the problem is how to make them more efficient, but particularly how to charge them. So it takes time for these batteries to recharge.
Mm.
And the best way you can do it is what's called solid state battery technology. So rather than chemicals mixing, it's literally just a solid state. So Toyota came up with this amazing new solid state battery, which can run for 500 kilometers. Like, actually, there are many electric cars that can do that, but this
Mm.
thing can charge in 10 minutes, you know? So instead of taking
What?
4 hours to recharge, it takes 10 minutes. Huge, huge, huge progress. So, I mean, this is very much, 2020 is when people think about from the future, they may not think about it as the year a giant pandemic and a giant orange oaf got beaten, right? They might actually not think about those two things necessarily at all. They may go, wow, this is the year that vaccine technology exploded. This is the year that we sort of we conquered the big battery problem. Because if you invest a massive amount of money in like renewables,
Yeah.
then you need to invest an equally massive amount of money in battery technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's news today that Amazon their data centers in Ireland are using about 1 million households worth of electricity every year. So, you know,
What?
they're using about half of the electricity of the country. And a lot of that has to be purchased from renewable sources, obviously. But if we could figure out how to store that electricity, it would be even better. And Amazon is a huge, huge, huge company, but they actually only employ about 2,000 people in that sector. So you've
Right.
got 2,000 people, and in a giant box or a couple of giant boxes,
Mm.
using half the country's electricity, which
That's
feels a bit inequitable as a distributional problem.
doesn't
But it
make
also
sense.
means that
Yeah.
there's going to be a huge push into renewables in the next while, which is
Well,
going to be cool.
it's funny because I
Oh,
mean, not that I've ever been in a position to afford an electric car, but they've always been a bit of a imagine, like I don't know, the idea I can go and I can put petrol in my car, it'll take X amount of minutes, and I
yeah,
know I will feel safe that my car will not stop
yeah,
working mid motorway or whatever. And
yeah,
even though I've never driven an electric car, but like the kind of off-putting thing is always this idea that it takes a long time to fuel up,
yeah,
and it was the lack of kind of, for want of a better word, mobility that
yeah,
proposes. So that's really interesting.
yeah. It's
So
cool. I think we're 35 years in Ireland. This is the 35th year that we've had mobile phones, the mobile phone technology here. And
mm,
when the mobile phone arrived first, it was literally a phone on top of a car battery.
yes,
Literally, it was a car battery. And if you ever watch like the first or second Lethal Weapon films, the
mhm.
phone that they have is the first phone that they came into Ireland. We're with electric cars now. We're where the mobile phone was 35 years ago.
I get you.
Yeah. So
Ha,
and we just made a big leap forward, which is cool. Which is
that's
cool.
class.
Which is
I
cool.
still remember Fair City when it came out first, which was probably, I don't know, late 80s or early 90s.
Hmm.
There was a character and he was the yuppie, he was the
Like him.
businessman.
Yeah.
Like he was the fella who had worked in business, and he had a
Ooh.
bit of a leather jacket and he had this mobile phone that he carried around with him all the time. And it was basically this size. Like I'm showing Stephen this bizarre instrument called a tomatone, which is, I don't know, it's about 12 inches in length, but it was like this giant brick, and he'd have it in his inner pocket, and the aerial would be sticking into his face. And this was the height of sophistication,
Oh
he
yeah.
had a mobile phone. And he probably could only call like one person on it, but anyway, it was it was gas. Weird. I really want to talk about something today.
Okay.
And it's something that only really came to my attention today. Well, it's basically around the vaccine, which we've been excited about. We've been talking about this for some weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
we've been using it as a marker for hope in these horizonless times, I've heard them
Yep.
described as. And so, if you tuned in last week, you might know that I have been doing a bit of work with young people on making podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to do, they don't just sit around all day. We try to do exercises to get them thinking and talking and that, and then just to mix up the day and the process. And so this very morning, we put a proposal in where it was kind of an extreme proposal, like that everyone should be made, when it becomes available, everyone should be made take the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And the one half of the room is if you agree, the other side of the room is if you disagree, and the other wall is if you don't know. And most people went down to the disagree wall. A lot of people were in the middle, and there's only two people on the agree. Now, obviously, it's
Okay.
an extreme thing, which is everyone should be made take the vaccine, which is a bit of a civil liberties issue.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not where the resistance was coming from. The resistance was coming from mistrust and concerns around infertility
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And I'm sitting there, and my job is not to correct them or anything. I'm just trying to get them talking.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I had not heard these kind of concerns. And so I sat there going, I need to go inform myself. But so I texted you and I said, Stephen, this is what we're talking about today. And I think has been, it's been the bane of the world for a very long time, but has really come into sharp relief in the last number of years, is the concept of fake news and false information. And it's not new, but it can be spread much easier, and it's much
Yeah.
more difficult to sometimes take out the wheat from the chaff, as they say, or to actually
Mm-hmm.
find reputable sources. So vaccines in general, these concerns. What do you got to say about them, Stephen?
I have many thoughts, Anne. Many
Yay!
thoughts. So let's start with a few things, right? So the first is let's start with what a vaccine is. Okay. So we can talk about the classical version of a vaccine and the modern version. So the classical version of a vaccine effectively injects you with a weak or dead version of the thing you want to be vaccinated against, and that causes an immune response, which allows your body to learn from what just happened and get a bit better, right? So the way I would think about this is what they've done with your body is they put training wheels on your body. They've literally put stabilizers on your bike so you can make it across the road and you'll be grand. The modern version, so that's the classic thing. So we give you a little bit of measles and rubella and mumps, and then you feel a little bit crappy, but then your body reacts, and then you don't get the full blown problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there are loads of issues that people have with when you get vaccinated, particularly when you're a small child. So, for example, there's a lot of stuff about that we might call associational. So you see something happening at the same time as another thing, and you think the first thing is caused by the other thing. Okay. So autism typically manifests and is diagnosed in children around about the same time as you vaccinate those children. And so it's very simple to call, because there is an association, the two things are happening at the same time, but there is no correlation in that one thing is caused by the other. Okay. And there's been a long debate in medicine about this, and a very, very, very wide scale study, a series of studies on this. And vaccines do not cause autism. I can say that as surely as I can say that smoking does cause cancer. Right. And the reason that you can do that is because you eliminate any other possible cause of something called confounding. So so let's take the smoking analogy. you might want just for a second to say, well, you know, maybe it's we have 100 women and 100 men, half of them smoke, half of them don't, and maybe it's women that just are much more likely to get cancer than men, and maybe it's not smoking, and then you knock it out because you see, oh, actually they get it in equal proportions, and then you go, oh, well, maybe it's older people versus younger people. And they said, well, no, you knock the age argument out. Maybe it's urban versus rural. You knock that out as well. Now, the numbers in your sample are dropping because not everyone is in urban, rural, male, female, young, old, whatever. But eventually, if the sample size is big enough, if you have enough people that you're looking at, eventually you get to the point where you're like, it couldn't possibly be anything else.
Yeah.
So the confounders are gone. They literally can't be anything else. That's what they did with this vaccine thing, and with the autism and vaccine thing. But that's been a very damaging exercise. But it is absolutely the case that vaccines do not cause autism. But and here's the but: some vaccines have had side effects, and the reason that this is the case is because you're producing one measure on a giant population of people. Right, so something is going to happen if you do something to 1 million people. Someone's going to have an effect, right? But in general, and this is the key point, right? In general, for the vast majority of people, these things are totally safe, right? And there is no link between autism and the classical vaccines. Now, the new vaccines, what are called messenger RNA vaccines, these are totally different, right? They're totally different because what they actually do is they send like a work order. The way I would describe it is they don't infect you with a dead or weakened version of the coronavirus. That's not what happens. What happens is they send it's literally altering. It's altering something called a ribosome. Okay, so think about a ribosome as a factory. Okay, so it sends a work order to a factory, and it says, make more of these things. Off you go. And the things that it make are what are called spike proteins. And essentially, like this kind of work order idea is it's a perfect way to think about it, because you have the body, and it's instead of learning from something else, it's being taught how to build something new. It's a totally different way of doing vaccinations. Okay, and I think one of the most important things about this kind of work order idea is where it takes place in your cells. So your cell is, every cell in your body has, or most cells in your body have you can think about it as sort of like a swimming pool. Right, and the edge of the swimming pool is sort of the very, very, very edge of the structure of your cell, and in the middle is or floating around it is a thing called the nucleus. Inside the nucleus of your cell is where your deoxyribonucleic acid, your DNA, is kept, and the copying code, if you like, for your body, the DNA, it comes from that part, the nucleus of your cell, which is grand. Okay, and so what we typically have is DNA telling proteins to replicate and to build in a particular place. That's in the nucleus of the cell. The ribosome, the RNA part, is in a totally different part of the cell. So it's a bit like, so people saying, oh, well, this could cause infertility. It's a bit like saying, like the DNA part is the engine, but the RNA part are like the hubcaps of the wheels. The one can't affect the other, like they just can't. It's not a thing, right? Now the major innovation here is that messenger RNA vaccines, which is the new kind, the Moderna one. What that does is, instead of forcing your entire body to learn from the imposition of the actual virus, and then the learning that happens is your body actually creates the ability to fight against the virus. What happens is, rather than forcing you to learn, it just goes, this is how to fight it. You don't have to learn how to do this. It just works. It's pretty great, actually. So, so the new vaccines are totally different to the old ones, and they don't have the kind of broad scale issues they're amazing. Some people have said, oh well, there's a big worry here. There's a big worry here that they were produced too fast. You know, they were like, you know, and it's not the case that they were just produced too quickly. What actually happened was what's called messenger RNA. You can think about the new widget, the new hotness, the new coolness. They actually they had a version of this ready to go before the coronavirus ever struck, and they knew that it would work. And instead of doing things in a very serial way, so step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, they did it in a parallel way. So they came up with the solution about 3 days after the coronavirus happened. They sequenced this thing's DNA and DNA in 3 days, in this genome in 3 days, and then they figured out a way to use the messenger RNA to attack it in like February of this year. And they spent the last couple of months with thousands and thousands of people all around the world doing nothing else but this. And also, instead of going, we think we have a solution, let's spend years doing research, and then we'll spend years getting regulatory approval, and then we'll spend years doing a clinical trial. They did that all at the same time. They went to the regulators and they said, we're doing this. Can you guys just keep an eye on us as we do it so that there's no gap? So that when we get to the right number of people, do you remember I told you about the 100 men and 100 women?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that number has to be a lot bigger for coronavirus, right?
Yeah.
When they got to the exact number of people that they knew that they knew that the vaccine was helping these people, but then they needed to have a 6-month follow-up to make sure that there were no side effects.
Yeah.
Right. And that actually is the gap between coming up with the thing and then realizing, oh my God, we actually have a big enough sample, and we can say with really like concrete, we're really concrete, and we can actually say, yes, this indeed is usable for everyone.
And isn't it fair to say as well, I suppose it is the first time there's ever been this amount of money and time and concentrated effort on something. Like normally you don't have this much shared interest, and it has been able to be done on a much larger scale than developing any other kind of vaccine.
There's one of the interesting things about the infertility claim is that, so this is what your students were reacting to. The infertility claim comes from a very specific source, an anti-vaccine campaigner. And what they did was, and it's really, really interesting. The claim is the COVID-19 spike protein, which is the thing that the RNA, the work order, it's the thing that gets edited, right? So it sounds very sciencey already, right? It causes an immune response against the virus, also trains the body to attack what's called syncytin-1, a protein in the placenta, which could lead to infertility in women. So that's the claim in the piece. Now, this claim went all around on WhatsApp. I'd be really interested to know where your students got the information. You know, I'd be really, really interested. Like it would be the source of that claim would be very interesting. But it turns out that this has absolutely no basis, because the spike protein in the COVID-19 virus and the protein in the placenta have very, very small amounts of material in common. Okay, and there's not enough to cause an immune system reaction in the placenta. It's just too small. Right. You know, so it sounds very medically, unless you're an actual medical doctor. Yeah. Right. And I think that's a really, really, really interesting thing. And the kind of worry is that this could be a big problem. And so when you have people and like that sounds like, oh God, you know, that's not good. And you think, particularly if you're a young person, you think,
particularly if you're a young person, I'm thinking, you know, you're thinking of, I'm a teenager now, I want to have kids.
Of course, there's a risk.
I might make a short-term decision now that's going to wreck my life. That's where their fear is, and it's very valid.
But what is really important to hear is that there's absolutely no evidence in any of the trials that the vaccine affects fertility.
And
None.
the big thing, I know what they'd throw back though. They'll say, well, it hasn't been long enough.
Yeah. Well, I think what's also very important here is that the Pfizer vaccine wasn't given to people who were pregnant.
Okay.
Precisely because of this issue. Right. So I think it's a very, very important point. You know, it hasn't been explicitly studied.
Mm-hmm.
So because it, like, think about it. You wouldn't, if you were an ethical researcher and you were literally doing a study to see if it has an effect.
Yeah.
Would you ever give it to a pregnant person? No, of course you wouldn't.
And there's also plenty of medications and that, you know, I know as a woman, if I'm getting anything done, one of the first questions I get asked are you pregnant? Do you know? Because there's always medical considerations extra in those situations. Yeah. So, but I think what's really interesting about like fake news in general is that there's always a little bit of truth in there for it to latch onto. Do you know?
It's an artful elision of reality, right?
Yeah.
So it says, so think about the two major components in that story. There's a spike protein which is quite like the one in the placenta.
Yeah.
And they're quite the same. And so you're like, oh, okay. Right. So if you Google that, you know, and then you go, oh, well, hang on a second. Like the effects of the virus, or the effects of the vaccine on pregnant people are unknown. So we should stay away from this. And the reality is, when you talk to people who are professors of immunology, they say it has no effect. No, like the two spike proteins are miles away from each other, you know, which is an interesting thing. But regardless of the specific veracity of that claim or not, I think what's really interesting is to note the structure. The structure is there's a claim to authority. Then the second thing is there's some language that's quite hard to understand for the average person. And the third thing is there's an appeal to fear. So think about those three things, right? So a doctor says it, or a researcher says it, or my friend who works as a consultant in a hospital told me that, you know. So the first is the appeal to authority. Second is the sort of the second thing is the medical stuff. Told my friend who's a consultant in the hospital told me that the ventilators that they were using on COVID patients were extremely bad for them, and in fact they would have been better with just high doses of vitamins, right? So kind of medically. And then the third thing, the appeal to fear, which is, oh, hang on a second. So what I want you to do something or not do something. And what I want you to not do in this case is, you know, COVID is all about oxygen. So you just need to make sure that you're just breathing as much as you possibly can, and, you know, don't believe any of the fake news and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And here, now transpose that entire story, which is just something that went around on WhatsApp during the first lockdown.
About the ventilators?
Yeah.
Really?
That was a specific story. I got that on WhatsApp from a friend of mine who's a lecturer in UL. And I was like, dude, this is nonsense. Look, think about it. And he was like, oh my God. So he like sent a thing out to all of his friends going, look, that's, come on. But it sounds so plausible and so easy to forward. You go, oh God, I should tell people.
Yeah.
I should let people know. And you just hit forward and it goes, you know, you can send it to 100 people or however many people you have on Facebook.
Yeah.
Now let's go back from that one. Let's go back to this one again.
Yeah.
Scientists say, right? So you would have a vague appeal to authority, not, you know, professor of immunology at Trinity College Dublin says. Scientists say that the COVID vaccine can cause or will cause infertility, right? Or they say it could lead to infertility. So again, there's that thing, and they go, oh, it's training the body to attack syncytin 1, this protein. So it sounds very medically. And then there's the appeal to fear. It could lead to infertility. And so you go, so I don't want to be infertile, and I don't want my friends to be infertile. Hit share. Now, note what's happened there. You haven't done a lot of things. So there's nothing about how clever you are, right? Nobody's clever enough to spot all this stuff. Just nobody is. Like I said, lecturer in UL with a PhD sent this on to me. It's not about smart. It's also not about being like, I think that I really don't like the term, which is like anti-vax, this kind of thing, or climate deniers. There's a sort of a value judgment being placed on a minority by a majority there.
Sure.
What's happening is your sort of animal systems, right? The fast thinking part of you has just been activated. Somebody has figured out how to push a button in your mind that says fear. And what you've done is you go, oh, shit, and you've run off, right?
Yeah.
And then because you've shared it, you feel good because you've helped people, but also you now have committed that this is your opinion. So somebody comes along and says, oh no, hang on, look at this, and I produce a bunch of studies, and you go, yeah, but you'll actually defend that position.
Yeah.
So people will defend a position that they haven't previously held on to, even if it's spurious. Like people like, do you remember the 2 + 2 = 5 thing?
No.
Oh, so there's a whole thing about like 2 + 2 = 5. And on Twitter for months and months and months, and people are going, this is fucking ridiculous. Of course 2 + 2 = 4. And they're like, well, no, we'll just consider it this way. And it became a whole thing. It started as a joke, actually.
It was kind of like proving how to argue a point, was it, or something like that?
More like look how postmodern the world is. That even the most basic concept, like 2 + 2 = 4, can actually be argued like for and against, right? So you've got people who are sort of reasonable, nice, normal people who just don't want bad things to happen, right? And that then the tribal dynamic in all humans constructs an us and them narrative, right? And who's the us? We're just the normal people who are trying to look out for our friends. And who's the them in this scenario? Giant pharmaceutical corporations, right?
Yeah.
Who let's face it, have not had a brilliant record in the past.
No.
Yeah. On many things, except on vaccines. The one thing that they're feckin' brilliant at. There are no doctors in the world. There are no medical doctors or surgeons or anything in the world that have saved as many lives as people who came up with vaccines. Jenner, the people like that, right?
It's funny. I remember listening to somebody else, like another podcast, talking about vaccines. They're talking about people who'd been through epidemics. So people who had lived in places where there was SARS or polio or things. So an epidemic in a country, not a pandemic that everyone's suffering from.
Sure.
And these are people like from India and a number of countries kind of in that area. And they just said, when the vaccine came, there wasn't even a debate.
Yeah.
Like no one could afford to debate this. And they kind of said often the notion of debating whether or not to take a vaccine is you have to be in an incredibly privileged position. You can't be homeless or living on the street going, I'm not sure about the vaccine. Not that you can't be, it's just really unlikely if something is like, let's say a deadly, like I know COVID-19 has been really detrimental, but I've had friends who've had it and are okay now. I've other friends who aren't, but it is not like, let's say, like Ebola or something like that, which is really horrific. Like, you do not want to get this. And if Ebola was doing the rounds, I don't think there'd be any debate about a vaccine. It would be like, give me that thing now. I think what these women were saying was like, no one had a little, I'm not sure. It was like, give me the polio vaccine,
Yeah.
give me the thing so my babies don't die, you know.
Mhm.
And I think that alone is very interesting. The privilege of the vaccine debate in
Yeah.
general.
Yep.
That you know, I am, and but I think it's really important what you're doing, Stephen, which is analyzing it, and because unfortunately these things get emotional, they go from 0 to 100,
Yep.
and basically people point fingers and saying you smell, I don't believe you, or whatever. Where it's
Mhm.
what's important is that we actually look at what mechanisms are at work here, and what is the truth.
Yep.
What is
What
the
is the truth?
actual truth? You know.
So here I have a couple of. So here's my bullshit avoidance toolkit.
This was the ultimate
Okay.
thing that Anne Steve Talk Stuff is offering today is a
This
bullshit
is
avoidance toolkit.
this is where we're going, and this is the bit that I really want, like, your students and everyone listening to the podcast to listen to, right? Remember, what's happening to you is deliberate. Okay, somebody has crafted this to engage an emotional, risk averse part of you that goes, oh, I don't want to get autism, I don't want to have infertility, I don't want to have any number of things happen to me, and so therefore I will push this on, right? That they want, that's the reaction that they want from you. Okay. and there's no value judgment here from you. Like, I'm not saying you're a bad person. It just, this is what this is designed to do, right? And so in a certain sense, this kind of mis or disinformation is a bit like the messenger RNA, right? It's forcing a reaction from you that you weren't necessarily, that you didn't know that you were doing. And the reason that you share this stuff is not to further disinform or misinform people. You actually want to help people. So it's weaponizing something that is really good within us, which is, I want to help Anne, I want to help Jenny, I don't want them to have something bad happen to them. And so I feel like by sharing, I will stop that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So step fucking one with this. A thing arrives on your phone, right? It is not arriving in a peer-reviewed journal, right? It's not arriving on the front page of the Irish Times. It's arriving on your phone, and it's coming from a couple of sources. One, it's being forwarded to you on WhatsApp or Snapchat or something like that. Yeah. Two, it's coming on a website like Facebook or Instagram, right? Both of those are just vast areas of dis and misinformation. The third place that it's typically coming from is from older members of your family who may ring you and go, did you know? Because they've read it. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first piece of so where's it coming from, right? If you're not seeing misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is like, I'm saying, I think misinformation is you're just getting the wrong information at the wrong time. Disinformation is somebody's actually trying to fuck with you. Like, they're really trying, and they want you to share stuff that's wrong, like this fertility issue, right? That's not misinformation, that's a disinformation. Like, they actively want you to stop using this vaccine. Okay. And they've come up with a lie in order to stop you. So the first step one with this is the April Fool's Day test. You know the way April Fool's Day, you start reading the paper and you're looking for the headline that's bullshit. You're looking for it. You're like, oh, is this right? Is that right? Is this right? Is that right? Treat every day like it's April Fool's Day. Everything that comes in, you're like, is that right? Is that right? You know? So it's just give yourself a little bit of like, is this true or not? Just that's the first thing you need to do. If you just exposed your critical faculties to this for 20 seconds, typically go, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right at all. I probably won't, I won't do that, right? So that's step one, April Fool's Day. Step two, take the claim and just stick it into Google. So the claim in your student's case is the Pfizer vaccine causes infertility. And that the first thing you get, the first hit you get, is from a fact-checking website called Snopes.com or fullfact.org or thejournal.ie, which has a fact-checking section, and they all go, this claim is bullshit, right? So step one, April Fool's test. Does that sound right? Don't know. Better check. Copy and paste the headline into Google. First thing you get, lads, this is nonsense, right? The third thing you should do is pay really, really strong attention to your own emotions. So be a little bit mindful about this, right? So you see this thing and it's like, oh, it could cause infertility. And you go, what's happening here? I'm really worried. I don't want my friends to become infertile, right? So your emotions are being affected. You're being forced into an emotional situation, you know? And if you just go, hang on a second, like, you know, this doesn't happen with fiscal policy or, you know, the latest, the Limerick Waterford results, right? You don't have the same, like, oh, I must do something, emotional response. It just doesn't happen. It's not a thing, right? So if it's an emotional thing, or a fast breaking thing, so if it's something like terrorists were seen in Limerick, you know, News 11, and you might, the people might actually inject fake news into those situations. So be very careful. If it's a fast breaking story, you might feel emotionally charged up just because it's happening now. Best thing to do in those situations is not share anything, right? And all you need to do really is just stop, look at it, count to 10, literally just count to 10.
Yeah.
That will take the emotion out of it. And then you go, is this right or not? Okay. Now, let's say you've done those things. So you've done the April Fool's test. This doesn't sound right. Or it feels a bit excessively emotional. Copy and paste the headline into Google, or go to Snopes.com, go to fullfact.org, and go to the journal fact-checking sites, or another site that you like, and go, this is bullshit. The next thing you should not do is roar back at the person who just shared it with you. Don't go, this is absolute bollocks, and this is ridiculous, you're an anti-vaxxer hoax, you know, person. Remember, the whole purpose of this mis or disinformation process is to sow confusion and fear and division. That's what it actually exists to do. Don't let that happen. And that can happen either by you pushing it on one way, or by you pushing back against the person who just sent it to you. So don't yell, don't roar. Just be like I did with my friend, I don't think that's a credible claim. Here's a website that I checked. Have a look yourself. You know, that person will almost certainly go, oh my God, you're right. Because remember, why are they doing this? They're not doing this to sow disinformation. You're just being used as a node in a network to harm other people, right? So just don't let yourself get used. Like people aren't stupid. People aren't malicious. People aren't vexatious. All they are, they're just a part of them is being weaponized by people who want to create fear. And just don't let them. Just do not let them. So that's my anti-bullshit checklist. Step 1, April Fools. Step 2, is there emotion involved? Step 3, check the claims. Step 4, find out if it's true or not, and don't yell at the person who gave it to you. Just send them to the place where you got sent. If you do that, you will avoid about 90% of all the nonsense. But most importantly, think about this, you will contribute to stopping the spread of this. Because if you send it on to 10 people and they send it on to 10 people, and then they send it on to 10 people, think about it, 10 by 10 by 10.
Yeah.
Okay? So and you just stop that. You stop that in its tracks. You have, in fact, prevented an infection. You've used a mask. You've used your skeptical, critical facilities as a mask to stop this from happening, which is just fantastic. You are a kind of hero if you do this. It's not easy. It's not easy, and it is difficult. But I wonder whether your students would be open to an engagement on this issue now that they have this opinion. that they hold collectively.
Mm.
There's a whole bunch of them who are like, no, this is what happens. This is now true, right?
Well, the
You know?
biggest argument was infertility. That was the biggest argument. It wasn't like one person actually in the don't know section went, I don't think anyone should be made to take a vaccine because I want to choose what goes into my body. And I went, well, yeah, that's what I thought would be the main disagree.
Yeah.
But no, it was the validity. It was the other stuff was this has not been tested enough. It's not trustworthy. We cannot trust this. We don't know the side effects. We don't know the long-term effects. It's too new. And it'll cause infertility. And then they said, oh, but only in a small group of people. Yeah, but like still in a small group of people.
Do you want to be in that small group? Of course
Yeah,
not. But again, it's the fear.
It's the fear. And to be honest, and as I said, I don't contribute because I want them to talk, you know. Yeah. And also when I heard this, I was like, I was looking at my colleague going, what? And she was going, what? And the problem is if you haven't heard something, or if I wasn't there armed with just point of information, lads, that's completely untrue and has no basis in reality and has been debunked like 4 days ago. There's one slight issue, just considering the lens we're all living in now, and this is maybe, I don't know what you think of this, but the whole issue of the algorithm, that as a user of the internet, that I know there is stuff I get and stuff I see that maybe somebody with different online behaviors to me would get. So if I throw something into, and this is a question, maybe it's possibly completely poorly placed question, but, and like, if I put something into Google like that, Pfizer vaccine infertility, which is what I did, everything that came up to me with New York Times, everything was, this is completely untrue, debunking this. If you were a person whose Google behaviors were different, would the algorithm give you different results?
Of course, it would, yeah. It would give you different results, but not overly different. So, for example, if you went, if you copied and pasted the actual text of the infertility thing into the thing, into Google, you would get the top result, which is the debunking of the claim.
Okay.
Right? And these are like, there's a couple of sites and they basically say it's the same thing. Again, another important point. If you have, you know, some dude on YouTube going yap about this, YouTube is not a credible source for anything.
No.
Right? You go onto YouTube now and type in central banks. What you get is a conspiracy theorist talking about how central banks are designed by like lizards to debase the currency and, you know, infect us all with fluoride. And I'm only being slightly facetious there, but the point is that that's the top result on YouTube. YouTube doesn't filter by quality; it just filters by quantity. Don't get your information from YouTube. Don't get your information from Facebook. Don't get your information from WhatsApp. You know, these are terrible, terrible places to get crucial information from, and yet they're the main sources for information in large parts of the world. I used to teach a course of mostly Indonesian students, and for these students, it was truly incredible. For them, the internet was Facebook. Like, Facebook wasn't one service that we just use as part of everything. It was just the internet. Like, it was, they accessed everything, banking, you know, sports, everything, name it, they got it through Facebook. And that's still true today, right? Although it's not on Facebook, it's on WhatsApp, which is the same thing because it's owned by the same platform.
Yes, of course.
But I think what is very interesting about the current debate is we're not having a discussion about should we put, you know, and again, all of the criticisms that your students had always developed too quickly, you know, it actually wasn't. It took about the same amount of time. It's just everyone did everything without any gaps
in parallel.
And so because it was the global challenge that needed to get fixed, right? So I view that as a feature, not a bug, right? Some of the stuff of like it wasn't tested on a broad enough set of the population, that is not true. Like, it was huge sample all across the world, all different kinds of, genders, ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which is unlike the generation of most vaccines. Most vaccines are tested on white people, young men mostly. So it's been a much more broad-based effort. But I would wonder, and I'd be very, very, very interested to know whether your students were open to having their minds changed.
Well,
This is a key problem.
yeah.
There's an issue in social psychology and in behavioral theory more generally, which is once held, an opinion is actually very difficult to dislodge.
Sure.
Even a demonstrably incorrect one, right? People will argue for hours about 2 + 2 = 5, not because they think it's right, but because they don't want to be shown to be wrong.
Yeah.
And so, and also, people don't want to be made feel like they're stupid.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why the demonization thing is a bad idea. It's why calling people anti-vax and all this,
and dismissing people,
dismissing
in large
concerns,
groups.
right? It's wrong to dismiss a concern. The concern may be illegitimate in the sense that, it's not actually based in fact. But that doesn't mean that it's not a concern. Until the concern is allayed, it's still a concern. Now, that doesn't mean the concern is enough of a reason not to do something.
Yeah.
Particularly in a world where we will have people who are immunocompromised who can't take a vaccine.
Yeah. And one of them made that point today, actually.
Yeah.
And I actually asked him because I hadn't heard that before. So
Yep.
if someone makes a claim like that, so that's, so people like on cancer treatment and things like that.
Yeah.
Can't
Yeah, or people, for example, very simple thing. My dad died of pancreatic cancer. And before he died, he had something called a Whipple, which was a particular type of operation which removed a bit of his pancreas and a bit of his spleen. And the problem with that is the spleen is a very important organ in developing antibodies. So effectively, he was left after this thing with a very, very, very poor immune system. Not non-existent, but not brilliant either. Like if you'd a cold, you couldn't go near him. So in a situation like that, he absolutely couldn't take a vaccine, like one of the old ones, because just the imposition of the weakened or dead virus would really, really, really hurt him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that situation, he was deeply immunocompromised, and we couldn't, and he had chemo, radio, whatever, therapies. So he wasn't actually able to take any of this stuff. So we were kind of walking around and going like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? But so that's a perfect example, by the way, of somebody, like you often think, oh, sick kids and this kind of stuff. It could be just anybody who just happens to be on immunosuppressing drugs.
Yeah.
People who have had kidney replacement, for example, that kind of stuff.
course.
Or cystic fibrosis patients who've had a multiple lung transplant. They don't have that much of an immune system, so you can't be giving them this kind of vaccines. Do you know?
And with this new vaccine, is that it'll be the same issue for people who are immunocompromised?
Again, there, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But that's another very important point, by the way. When you're not sure about something, don't claim that you know it. Don't specifically, this is sort of point 6 of the bullshit task. If somebody says, "Oh my God, this is true," and you're like, "Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not sure." Don't skill it out. Don't be like, "Oh," don't sort of balsy up and give it loads. Just actually say, "I don't know."
Yeah.
Because if you can't know everything, right? You can't know everything. I happen to have spent a fair bit of time staring at this vaccine stuff just because of that. But I'm also not a medical doctor, right? And I don't play well on the internet. I'm an economist. Yeah. I've looked at this very carefully and I've thought about this a lot. And I did actually teach a class on bullshit avoidance, which is why I have the checklist in the first place. But everything I could have said to you could be absolute bollocks, right? I could have just made it up. How would you know? How would you know?
You're the bullshit detector?
Step 1.
Yeah.
Step 1.
Yeah.
Apply it to myself, right? I just ranted on for about an hour at you at this. Step 1 is, does this sound right? Just to yourself, April Fool's Day. Step 2, is there an appeal to an emotion? Not really. It's not really an emotional argument. Actually, if anything, it's saying, please take the emotions out of it. But let's say you're still like, not sure about this, not sure about this.
Mhm.
Stick it into Google, have a look at Snopes.com, fullfact.org, one of these websites. Are the things that I'm saying correct and referenced by places like that? Yes, they are.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. So your man's a bit of a bullshit artist, but I kind of, his claims seem to be correct from other sources. Grand. Remember the fifth one. Is there an appeal to fear?
Yeah.
No, there's no appeal to fear. Well, actually, what I'm saying is check your emotions
Mm.
and don't act or think in terms of fear. So it's, and I would say this, wouldn't I? So if you might be listening to this because this guy, he's part of the conspiracy, of course,
He's very, you can't see him, folks, but he is basically a lizard.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing. You can't make fun of people.
No.
Some
No,
of
no,
some of the
no,
beliefs
no,
are kind of silly, right? But still, like,
no.
if people genuinely hold them.
No,
it can be
absolutely. And I think I certainly 5 years ago learned a lot with the marriage equality referendum. Well, that nothing happens, no minds will get changed on the social media. But also, if you want to bring people with you, you respect them. You don't scream at them. You
Yeah.
don't dismiss them and slag
Yeah.
them. You listen to them, and the only way you're going to get anyone on your side is through dialogue and respect.
Exactly.
And you might only end up just agreeing to disagree, but listen, Stephen, time as ever is upon us. But thank you so much for your bullshit detector and your information. Fascinating as always.
Yeah.
And I think very worthwhile discussion as well. I think possibly one that's needed right now.
Yeah. And if your students want to have a chat, let's just organize something where we just find time to have a chat.
I'll see. I'll keep you posted.
I'm a public servant. It's my job to serve the public. Your students are the public. If I can help, let me know.
Super. Okay. Well, listen, thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And we will, as ever, talk again soon. Have a good week.
You too.